Bismillah Rahman Rahim. All right, students, welcome to another episode of Career Pinnacle. I hope this will be an exciting and enlightening episode for you. We here believe that life is not just about a higher profit, it's also about a higher purpose. Pinnacle attempts to help you discover your purpose by introducing you to people who have found theirs. In 1965, an activist named Norman Morrison set himself on fire outside the office of Robert McNamara, uh, right outside the Pentagon. Uh, Last year, in fact, this year, a similar incident took place in which Aaron Bushnell set himself on fire. In both these cases, the people were protesting. The people who set themselves on fire were protesting what they thought was exploitation of a people. Bushnell said that I am protesting against what people have been experiencing in Palestine at the hands of their colonizers, and he declared that he will no longer be complicit in what he thought was a genocide. My guest today is a peace activist who has been extremely busy for the last 8 months protesting the wholesale extermination of innocent people, particularly in Gaza. Julia Norman joins me from Washington, D.C., and I believe she is in the US Congress building. Welcome, a very warm welcome to you, Ms. Norman. How are things there?
Thank you so much for having me. It's truly an honor to be here and to speak with you today. And I'm so moved that you brought up Aaron, because Aaron was actually the impetus for me coming to devote my time 100% to Congress. Before that, I was pursuing a few different avenues within the DC area and was a grad student as well. I just finished my program in environmental policy, and I hadn't decided that I was going to commit myself full time to something like this. And watching someone give their life, a young man my exact same age, was the reason that I realized I had an obligation to do more. So I just wanted to say that after your acknowledgement of his sacrifice. And things are well. It's a beautiful morning here in DC. Congress just returned from their break. Frankly, lately, I wish they would stay on break longer, because they don't seem to be doing very productive things when they're here. But we're ready to greet them and continue with our lobbying.
All right, before we go to nicer things, I would like to talk a little bit about some mundane things like your education at UC Berkeley. Tell me, how far has Berkeley influenced you to become the person that you are today?
It was very foundational. I also had a unique experience in that I pursued my degree in 3 years instead of 4 to save money. And that kind of expediency meant that I had 21 unit, like the maximum course load every semester, which just made it to a degree a bit more intense. And, you know, while that was very helpful in terms of, getting out of college without debt, I don't actually recommend that if you can avoid it, because I think Berkeley, the people that I was with, the ideas I got exposed to, profoundly actually changed my trajectory. I came into UC Berkeley because I was steadfast on law school and child advocacy law within the family court system. And then I got exposed to a lot of environmentalists and was really active in agricultural groups and all kinds of different like community-based projects in the Berkeley area. And that just shifted my projection towards environmental policy dramatically. But at the same time, in terms of like the social experience, my time was so compact, so compressed. I was so focused and working so hard that when I graduated, I was like, I had already taken the LSAT, the exam to go into law school. But I chose to do a year off, and I instead spent a year going to live and work on regenerative farms, and working for different environmental nonprofits. And so Berkeley was kind of the impetus for that experience because of how compressed it had been, also just totally opening up my worldview. But then that year ended up also just kind of changing what my aspirations were. And I think that that's why I'm now in the halls of Congress today, just kind of thinking about how we are connected to other people. Agriculture does a really good job of that because it's all based on systems.
And which teacher influenced you the most and why?
I had an associate professor, her name is Tiffany Page, and she definitely, and I've told her this, has changed the course of my life. I don't know if, I hope people have this kind of experience, but for me, it was really quite formidable in that her class was on sustainable development, quote unquote, but really it was a class on kind of like decolonizing your mind. As an American student, you're taught a lot of kind of an arc of history that like celebrates American nationalism and American exceptionalism. And then to have a professor who kind of flipped a lot of that on its head and exposed the military industrial complex, who talked a lot about structural adjustment programs, who gave me a much more kind of globally oriented perspective of how other countries might view the United States and our history and our involvement in other countries, really just started getting gears turning. And I had so many more questions when I left her class than when I began with. And that was also one of the reasons that I was then drawn to do some sort of experiential learning process, like by going to small scale farms, because we were talking a lot about, you know, what are the solutions to climate change? And a lot of them were locally based, in addition to like major policy shifts. And I just was like, I've never seen anything like that as a student from LA or going to UC Berkeley. And I can't even imagine what it would be like to think in those terms, because my life has always been in a big city. And yeah, that was a really, and so I credit her with a lot of just kind of shifting the perspectives that I've had in the past.
And if I may ask you, a lot of my students apply to California, a lot of my students apply to Berkeley. So they would definitely want to hear from you how you handled your personal essay, which I always call the clincher in the case of a competitive college.
Well, I was really fortunate in that I was involved in a free program called College Bound. And so I worked with a woman who was a volunteer, and we just went, I did that essay process for probably several months, just writing draft after draft after draft. But I would agree with you. And I would say, I think a thing for school like UC Berkeley, I mean, I'm in the UC system as a California native. It's, I don't even know how many applicants at this point, maybe 80,000 or something. And I think that the essay is actually
over 100,000.
Wow.
Over 100,000.
Yeah, so it's an incredible pool of applicants, and a lot of people have high GPAs and SAT scores and all of these things. But I think that's your chance to differentiate and tell your narrative, and to really be kind of specific. That's what my college, the person who worked with me, the volunteer, kept trying to get out of me, is like, let's not speak in generalizations or aspirations, because those are beautiful qualities that you have, but those are quite universal. So I would like you to be, honest, and share why you, like, what makes you unique as an individual, as much as you're willing to be forthcoming about that. And I do think it matters. I really do, because it is the only place where you don't just become a bunch of numbers that they've already filtered out.
So you can pass this question if you want to, but in the end, what was unique about you and how did you make yourself stand out?
Well, I would say for myself, I kind of told the arc of what was my professional development experience. I had come from a family of a lot of domestic violence, and that was why I was interested in child advocacy. And that had always kind of been my draw towards law school. But my experiences throughout high school, leadership, I think, is another thing that's really important, is like, while you're a high school student, pursue activities or pursue what your passion is. If it's the arts, if it's sciences, if it's CS, don't wait for college to become that avenue. If you can, find ways to be involved. And so I discussed how I had always been a part of different policy decisions, or policy programs, I should say. And then talked about how that was kind of that the long arc of where I thought I was going, which it all ultimately changed. So that's another thing to be to expect going into university. But I was very clear on where I was headed, and I was very clear as to what experiences, very transparently, frankly, had got me there. But without making it, I think you have to be weary of like telling a kind of sob story. Like there's a whole narrative now that like, oh, I have to have had some traumatic event to be worthy of going into college and these essays. And that's not at all the case. But I think what they're looking for, frankly, is vulnerability. So what life experiences have you had that shape who you are?
Yeah, as I tell my students, there's a difference between a college and an asylum. So, so yeah, and just to coming to your activism now, since October 7, how many times have you been apprehended, and why exactly?
So if you would have told me before this period, would I ever be arrested? I would have said, I don't know what reality that is going to happen in. But now it's been 3 times. I have a pending court case. In 2 weeks, I will go and see what the judge determines. I've had to kind of relearn what that means, being arrested. I used to associate it with, you know, activities that are against the law and something that is disruptive and perhaps even like, I don't like to use the word bad, but just, you know, that's what you just get taught, that you're not supposed to be arrested. But since coming to Congress, and using my voice to peacefully protest, which as an American, I get taught, you know, I have First Amendment rights and I'm able to speak my mind when I choose to. But it's been clear that if you're speaking against the government critically, actively, in the face of the officials who are running these policies, that's actually not all that accepted. We certainly have more liberties. I don't want to say that that's not the case, but so it has all been for protest. One of them was planned, like there was a hearing in which there was the defense counsel speaking, and we knew we wanted to speak up in the hearing. A few of us planned to actively disrupt and have the police escort us. And our message, not disrupt like rah, 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 but say our message about what's going on in Gaza, because when you go to those hearings, I mean, it's quite frankly shocking the lies that they testify on in front of senators and representatives. The other 2 were actually circumstances where I had not planned at all. I was very shocked in both cases that I was arrested because I was silent. I was holding hands. I was wearing graphic shirts. It was just visual protest, which I had been frankly allowed to do. But I think as the time has gone on in the halls of Congress and the public has really turned against what this institution is doing, which is partnering in the genocide against the Palestinian people, funding it unilaterally, almost. I mean, you know, caveats, but really we're providing like 70% of the weapons. That has now become more unacceptable. So for Antony Blinken, I was just raising my hands. They were painted red. I was walking out of the room, which we had actually been told by the police officers would be acceptable. And then as I was walking, a police officer said, she's being arrested. And I tried to explain to him how consequential that would be because I had already had a pending arrest. I was trying to explain, like, 1, this is not arrestable, but 2, if you do this, I'm going to spend the night in jail and it's going to be much more significant than what you're thinking. And he was very disconcerted with that.
I actually saw that proceeding when Mr. Blinken was there and you were there, and it was all on tape. You actually did nothing that day. I was just wondering what's happening. I mean, they just want to arrest someone because they want to arrest someone. That was the case. It actually, you see, you said that Aaron Bushnell was your age, and when I was your age, there was a girl my age. She was an American, and her name was Rachel Corrie. And I remember her last words. Her last words were, "I think my back is broken." And I read those. That was again a very bad time, but that was a bad time for the West Bank, and it was a very bad time for the Muslim population of Gujarat. If you have read about that, the genocide of the pogrom of Gujarat, and there was a full-scale incursion in Jenin, and there was a lot of settlement activity, and the international solidarity movement tried to stop those settlement activities, and Rachel Corrie and again, that's what I was thinking. That's the problem. I mean, this is exactly what was she doing exactly that they ran that bulldozer over? She did nothing. She was just standing there. Those pictures are very much here. She didn't hurt anybody. She was just saying, "What are you doing, and why are you demolishing this doctor's house or this engineer's house?" And they just ran the bulldozer over. Okay, let me just go to the next question. Um, uh, After studying political economics, because I was an economics teacher too, you could have gone into any governmental or financial institution, uh, and you could have made money on Wall Street, like Jamie Dimon or someone. Then why did you go into advocacy and activism?
Well, thank you for that question. I think some of it I've already explained in that my journey when I spent the year on farms, it was a totally different re-education also as far as this kind of like linear thinking that I had been taught. And I had a whole policy background that was very formidable. And my economics background, um, which I studied frankly because it's supposedly useful in terms of training your brain to be a good law student. That was the reason that I approached it. Um, but in that experience, when I had a hands-on learning experience and was also thinking about how landscapes are a whole system, they, if you are managing waste properly, like waste is in itself reusable and then just becomes part of a loop, and you can farm being aware of the water cycle, all this kind of type of these realities reshaped how I thought at large, and also just what I thought was meaningful in life. To see other people who were not kind of caught in the, you get a good job and you get a good job, so you get money, and then you get money, and then you retire, and that's the purpose of your life. Instead, I was seeing people whose entire lives were devoted towards community care, and I felt like I wanted to be a part of that and didn't necessarily need to then like retreat into a rural space and create my own farm, but just that like this notion of interconnectedness and interdependence is quite universal, and that I could approach everyone in a very busy city or a place like DC with that kind of deep sense of like kinship, and also a sense that I'm a part of a system, even if it feels so much bigger than me than it is. And I could play a role in making it function in the way that I would idealize, which is one that values human life and human decency above all else and serves the needs of common people. And so that is kind of what drew me there. And then in terms of activism, I actually would have never frankly thought that I would be doing any of this, because I don't like confrontation. I'm a more introverted person. I haven't always been like outspokenly politically active. I've always been very politically conscious and like was part of the BLM Black Lives Matter movement when it resurged here in 2020. But it has been watching the atrocities. It has been being so shocked, viscerally shocked by what my government is doing, the breach of the humanitarian law in front of all of our faces, and so that is what has made me feel like I actually don't have a choice but to respond, because if I really care, and I'm here in Washington, D.C., which some people refer to as the belly of the beast, it's heart of our U.S. empire, then, if I'm going to sit here and not do anything, I can't expect a different result, or I'm not acknowledging that I'm a part of it. You know, if I really believe that I have a role to play and I'm a part of humanity, then my voice is required.
I'm not sure if I'm right about this, but we are hearing reports that Julian Assange is being released, and he has been charged with the time served, which is only 14 years. Uh, Socrates said that Carthage is a city destined to be doomed because there any profession that makes a profit is acceptable. So, what is happening to politics these days? How is legislation taking place, and how important has money become in this legislative process? We have 1 minute for this question because I have a lot of questions.
Well, I will just say briefly, the United States, specifically in the past 10 years, this is not a new phenomenon, but with the Citizens United Supreme Court case that allowed corporations to donate and act as individuals for campaigns, has really just exponentially grown the problem here of corruption in the United States. And I would just say there is such a clear, specifically with the issue of Gaza, of Palestine, which politicians are in favor of defending Israel with absolute impunity and arming them to the teeth with our federal taxpayer dollars. It's those who receive absorbent amounts of money from the pro-Israel lobby groups and from the weapons manufacturers themselves, or if they have their own investments, and they will probably leave their seat and walk onto the board of one of these companies. And so, what we're seeing is just a direct correlation between where is their money coming from, and not just the money that goes towards their campaign. We find increasingly these reports coming out of money that is going to members of their family, or trips, or gifts, things that supposedly should not be happening within the American democratic system, but have become quite the norm. And I think that's why it's really important as well that corporations are not able to finance political interests, because they are not usually representative of who these people are supposed to be representing, their constituents, their districts. I mean, you have someone I'll just give Richie Torres, and I'll be really quick. Richie Torres is from New York. He's from the poorest district in our country, the Bronx, New York. His people are in 33% are poverty, and he is one of the most steadfast supporters of sending billions of dollars to Israel at this time.
So then, is it fair to say that the special interests have supplanted the idealistic pressure groups that are so important for the legislative process?
Absolutely. I mean, we can't even get meetings. I technically am part of a lobby group, a coalition, and they don't respond to our emails. They don't respond to our calls. It doesn't matter if you're from the actual district. If you have just your agenda as a constituent, they will maybe log you. They will give you the face potentially and pretend to care, but you won't be able to actually sit down with a staffer. Whereas if I'm from the American Israel pro lobby committee and I come into an office, I will immediately be seated. I will have an hour. Maybe we'll meet somewhere for lunch at a hotel. Just even in terms of the amount of interaction time is so different, and is taken seriously in that way. It's very difficult to be taken seriously or acknowledged or get the time that you deserve. Even if you're we have a group called Doctors Against Genocide. These are all doctors volunteering their time, and they cannot get meetings. It's not just the people that are activists. You can be a working professional who's highly respected in your community, but if you are not working for a PAC, if you are not able to donate the big dollars, you're not going to get the time.
And just to put the terms in perspective, PAC stands for Political Action Committee. And the strongest PAC, I think, the super PAC in the United States is the APAC. So uh, tell us how lobbies function. What are lobbies and how do they function? 1 minute for this answer.
So now that I realize I myself am a lobbyist, it just really means that you're lobbying for political action. But how real lobby groups work is they might as well in themselves be considered kind of like a business or a corporation. They have a think tank members. Some of these people are actually drafting marker bills, pieces of legislation that make their way to the representatives that they then advocate for certain policies for. So they have high executive leadership, but lobbies really are just groups that have very specific interests related to certain bills. So I'm usually focused on the farm bill, which deals with agricultural issues. And we think that we have like the dairy lobby groups that come in from these huge milk corporations, and they're lobbying for certain pieces of legislation. You have the American Israel the pro-Israel lobby, and they come in and they are advocating for more weapons, or they're advocating for sanctioning Iran, things like this. So they have objectives, and they use their money, their financial capital, to achieve those objectives. But anyone can lobby in the sense that anyone can use their voice to push for a certain policy agenda.
What has the peace movement achieved in concrete terms?
This is a really difficult question in the sense that lately I have been feeling like we're actually not making progress on this issue. I know we are, and I know that we're changing hearts and minds, and that we see such reception from people online. But sometimes it can feel overwhelming in the sense that like the policy is actually getting worse, or we now see what seems like we're going to escalate with US weapons being sent to Israel so that the siege of Lebanon can continue. So when I think about our lobbying, what have we accomplished? I'm not sure of the direct relationship, but what I know has been accomplished is we put pressure on these people every day. The staff members tell us that we are making a difference, and that if our voice wasn't here, things would be exponentially worse. And I think we raise awareness and build community. As a member of what we want to call like the peace community, I would just say that if I'm looking just at my life, if I'm not thinking about what are the outcomes of this work, I have built relationships and networks and mutual aid with hundreds of people in the DC area. I have new family that I would have never met. And for that reason alone, too, like the peace movement is the kind of like grassroots, it's what we need in terms of what's lacking in this world: connectivity and support and feeding one another and taking care of one another's medical needs. It is kind of creating the world that we would hope to see. So there's that component of it as well.
I'll tell you one more thing about it. The peace movement is, as I look at it, is not very significant in terms of what it has achieved in concrete terms. I'm talking about the peace movement of the last 60 years. But it is very significant in terms of what it has not permitted its opponents to achieve. After the Vietnam conflict, they came up with two things. And they always say, whenever you criticize them, you always say you are a conspiracy theorist. And I always reply that if you go and read Dr. Wilson, your President Wilson, the conclusion of what he's written is this: secrecy is the mother of conspiracy. If you have secrecy, somewhere a conspiracy will be born. So what they did was, after the Vietnam conflict, they started making education expensive. And it was so reminiscent when your speaker came to the universities, I think to the Harvard University, and he said, think about your parents' money, go and study. I mean, that was what they planned after the peace movement, the Vietnam peace movement. Universities don't need the kind of money that they are charging the students. Some universities are really flushed with money, but they decided to charge high fees for two reasons. One was to keep students under the pressure of finance, and the other was to promote the lending business, which are agencies that lend money to students. And if you go and look into the finances, students that graduated with me and took a loan, they're still paying off their money. But the good thing is that despite this, the students of today, they stood up and they protested, and they came up with this very vibrant movement. And we heard, and I mean, I could only remember things like, "Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today?" I never thought that I'll hear "A people united will never be defeated." So that is a great achievement, that you have not permitted these special interest groups to achieve what they wanted to achieve after 50 years and after billions of dollars of donations that they have given to universities. So kudos to you. So my next question will be, what are the 4 or 5 things which you think are important to achieve to establish peace in conflict areas, especially in the Middle East?
This is such a, and thank you too for that addition. That is so important and interesting for me to know as well. I honestly feel like at this point, I have seen the detriment to which our U.S. government, the role that we have played in destabilizing the Middle East, and the way in which Israel has acted or has served as a proxy. And I think these are huge fundamental challenges just in terms of kind of both reforming the UN system and like revitalizing it as actually a tool for a new world order in which it is not just based on members of the Security Council like yielding this kind of power to accomplish their means, that we need a multilateral governing system that recognize we are in an extremely globalized era with universal challenges, climate change being one of them, in which members have equal voices, where we cannot see, UN vetoes 3 times throughout the period for a ceasefire in 9 months. I also think the issue of, I don't, again, we just touched on conspiracy theories, but there's a real prospect of the fact that like Israel has been issuing in October new permits for oil companies for drilling in that portion of the Mediterranean. And I think even when I was reading historical documents from Truman's era before 1948, there were clear sentences about the need for the United States to be involved there for oil reserves if we were to go to war with Russia. This is like pre-Cold War sentiment. And so for me as a young person, I also think about like, how do we move away from just dependency on fossil fuels? And then this all comes back to this kind of what could really stabilize the Middle East would be stabilizing our governing system so that we do not have, corporate control over our democracies that then shape our foreign policy. Because this is an issue of greed and corruption and militarism and people who champion it. Like we have Senator Lindsey Graham, who's really outspoken. I don't know if you're familiar with him. But there's just no basis in what he's doing in terms of thinking about the repercussions. It's all about who is giving him money and what talking points he has. And so it's really unfortunate because it's more than unfortunate. Millions of people suffer horribly at the cost of a military industrial complex where our budget for the Department of Defense has gone up, I think like 40 or 50% in the past 40 years, while we have not increased a single dollar to our diplomatic efforts. The State Department's budget has actually, with inflation, depreciated. And so I think that kind of tells you like where our interests lie. How can you have peace, quote unquote, in the Middle East when we are investing so heavily in defense, quote unquote, armament, and we are not at all investing in actual diplomatic relationships? We have normalization, but again, normalization with like the US and Saudi is all about the flow of oil reserves and trying to spread, they want to build higher towers and have music festivals. So it's it requires a global reformation. But I do think sometimes, in my terms, that also means people starting to see themselves as less nationalist, and starting to see themselves as global citizens in a globally inequitable society. That I might have more in common with the people of Pakistan who are normal working people than I do with, the American Congress members, because I'm an American. That we are working people with shared values of humanity, who are faced with formidable forces of corruption.
Absolutely, and that's the thing that when we go and look into other societies, we find that there are people like us who share our concerns and who share our problems and who share our priorities. So, on a lighter note, uh, Elise Mary Stefanik or Marjorie Green, if
Oh, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I repeat the question. I said Elise Mary Stefanik or Marjorie Green, if President Trump becomes president again, who will be vice president?
That is a scary question, even though we said it would be on a lighter note. I would say that actually there is discourse that Elise Stefanik is supposed to be propping herself up for the VP position. Um, I think MTG is just a bit too comical. I don't know. There was a clip that went around, at least virally in the United States, of her recently insulting someone's appearance. It's almost like some sort of reality TV show. She makes a mockery of our Congress. So I don't know. Maybe I would rather have MTG than Elise Stefanik, because Elise is a bit more dangerous in terms of her cunningness and commitment to values that I do not share and hold. So I hope neither, though. Let's just avoid that altogether.
Well, I don't know, but otherwise, yeah, keeping those value things. But I think Elise comes across as an energetic person and an educated person, which she definitely is. She studied at Harvard College. So how did you feel when you saw Elise Stefanik grill the president of Harvard and the other colleges in Congress?
I was so disappointed, particularly with the Columbia hearing, because President Shafiq, who was the president of Columbia University, really did kind of appease the members of Congress in that committee who were calling her there in the first place, which is to put forth a notion that all of the college encampments are anti-Semitic, just fueling places of hate, as opposed to being what they really are, which is anti-genocide encampments, students who are standing for peace, and the fact that there were Jewish students as a part of those encampments. So watching the two engage with each other and kind of cement the propaganda that was the purpose of the hearing in the first place was very bothersome. And I would also, to your point about Congresswoman Stefanik being a very intelligent person, she is, and she has been at every single one of these anti-Semitism hearings. We've probably had 12 at this point, just grilling the presidents of universities. And she's been paid for it. I mean, I hate to keep bringing this up, but I just want to note that, she's also been getting just exorbitant donations, specifically from Board of Trustee members from universities like Columbia, from universities like University of Pennsylvania. So it's hard to deduce whether or not she even believes in what she is asking, in cutting terms, or if it is because it serves her interests. I mean, to a certain degree, I think we also have a problem of Christian Zionism in this country that's quite firm in our Congress, and that is essentially believing for religious reasons that Israel is the holy land of the Jewish people and that Palestinians are to be displaced, and this is almost biblical. And some of these beliefs are quite scary because besides the fact that they result in justifying violence of the worst degree, they also have no place in a secular government. Your beliefs of what will happen in the land of Judea should not be influencing your policies as a congressperson in our democratic society. So sorry, that was a longer answer, but these are these challenges that we're up against with people like Stefanik.
Actually, I'll tell you something with my experience, if you have time. Do we have 5 minutes still? Okay.
Yes, of course.
I don't want to sound chauvinistic or anything like that, but there are 3 nationalities that I cannot fathom taking a position on a moral issue when their economic interests are at stake. Number 1 are the British, number 2 are the Egyptians, and the third are we. So Shafiq is 2 of those. It is very easy for me to, because I work with all. I have been to Egypt. I live here, and I have never left my country. Whatever it is, it's my country. I never wanted to leave it, and I'm still here. But of all the organizational heads that I've met in my life, and I have met many here and British as well, for me it is very easy to picture an American taking an issue, taking a stand on what they consider a moral issue. So this is what we saw that day, and that is what I was seeing. That Claudia Gay and the other lady from Pennsylvania, they were simply not accepting that something constitutes anti-Semitic behavior. It was very easy for Dr. Shafiq to go and take the, oh yes, it does, and what are you going to do? We are going to send in the cops, and and that's exactly what she did, because once you say that in Congress, you have to follow through on your word. So what is the way forward in Gaza?
Well, I think we need, I can't believe we're still asking for this, but we need first an immediate ceasefire. I was just reading the United Nations Environmental Program report that came out this.
I'm really sorry to cut you here, but yesterday Netanyahu said that the main operations in Rafah are ending. Is that true? Is that?
I did hear that, but I also heard that they will now be resuming their efforts in the north. So I think that this could go on for quite some time, as they have, said that it could even foreseeably go into the new year. I also really worry about escalation in Lebanon, particularly southern Lebanon. For Gaza, though, we need a complete cessation of military bombardment, of the ground invasion. It has to be, it is the worst in terms of the speed at which it has proceeded, and the level of just destruction to infrastructure and like life-saving things like sanitation plans and access to the sea, things like that. This situation is like beyond the pale. I can't even begin to fathom the reconstruction process, but we need a ceasefire. We need uninhibited aid. The Rafah crossing has still been blocked since May 6th, and that is needed to go into the south, because aid has been trickling at this pace that is like unfathomable into the north. And most humanitarian aid organizations as well, they keep pulling out or going in. We don't even know. This UNEP report that I was reading about the environmental destruction kept saying everything is based upon only a few pieces of information they have back from January. but also from using previous bombardments like the 2008 and 2009 war or Operation Cast Lead. They're trying to make projections off of those models because you can't actually get into Gaza because it's so unsafe, to start doing calculations of what is required to meet the needs of the people in the land. So we need that immediately. We need UNRWA to be refunded so that it can provide the social services and the disbursement of aid. I'm glad that other countries have not followed suit with the United States. They've reinstated funding. But frankly, when I even begin to fathom what comes after this, it is heart-wrenching, because this has been a mass disabling event. This has been an event that has created, tens of thousands of orphans. The trauma, the psychological trauma, is something that I do not know how we're going to begin to address. So it's going to require an international response, and is going to take a few decades just to clear the rubble, just to make Gaza a place that can actually be lived in. So we need to stop the destruction of it immediately.
And when they start clearing the rubble, I wonder how many thousands of bodies they will find from beneath the rubble. My last question to you is, when you see the state of apathy and filthy self-interest in Arab and Muslim societies, as an American, how do you react?
Well, I would say I'm always weary to speak to the freedom or liberty that other people have to speak in other places. So I don't want to touch on that, although I would like to say that I think art is a very powerful medium. I keep bringing this up for people who are not interested in putting themselves out there outspokenly with activism, that there's a way to show solidarity and express concern for people in ways that aren't explicit. And art does a really good job of preserving culture and identity and conveying emotion, keeping our humanity alive. But to people who are indifferent, I myself am not Muslim, so I won't speak of the Ummah as what I might even be saying that incorrectly, but just the sense of universal community. These are brothers and sisters. They are American brothers and sisters. For anyone that feels apathetic or this is just an unfortunate cost that is being levied on a population, I would always ask people to consider what that means for your own humanity. When we have compartmentalized someone else's suffering or said that we can trade it or that it's not part of us, if you need a selfish reason to interrogate that, don't do it because you feel like it's virtuous to care. Think about, what mind and heart am I living in if I have distanced myself so much from other people? And do I think that that's a world that's safer for me? A world in which people are not concerned with other people's well-being? Probably not. And I would also say that, look what we're happening in Lebanon. Look what is going on in Lebanon. If you need a selfish reason to care, this is destabilizing for the entire world, and it has undermined international law. So on just a person-to-person basis, I would just really encourage anyone who is apathetic to interrogate why that is, and to reconsider if it is even logical, so to speak. Not just, are you emotionally stirred by the people of Gaza, but is it a sound decision to have our entire, quote, rules-based order just blatantly disregarded? I would argue not.
And surely, as an American, you people are blessed not because of your resources, not because of your might, but because of things like your Constitution and things like your Bill of Rights. So those are things that do not exist in our societies, and I really wish they did. So congratulations to you on that. And I have always been a great fan of the American experiment. And I totally believe in the American experiment as much as I believe in my own country. And so in that sense, I've always been a global citizen. But what worries me is that uh, my children or the younger generation in my country does not look toward America in that same way that I used to look up to. In fact, I'm writing a short non-fiction which I will share with you on Lincoln and Kennedy. So that is it. So thank you very much, and students, please do join us again. We are not through with you yet. Do join us again next week. In fact, on Friday we have a meeting with the admission counselor of the State University of New York system. So that will be really useful for you. Her name is Chloe Glenn, and Chloe Glenn will be joining me from New York. To you and to all the peace activists with you, please give my best to Miss Benjamin, and please tell her that I'll be very happy if she could join me someday whenever she's free. I understand she's very busy, to discuss Vietnam, her experiences with the Vietnam peace thing. So I will end with Tennyson and what Ted Kennedy said in one of his speeches. He quoted Tennyson, and this is what Tennyson had to say. Uh, I'm a part of all that I have met. Too much is taken, too much abides. That which we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. For all those whose cares have been our concern, the work goes on, the cause endures, the hope still lives, and the dream shall never die. Julia Norman, thank you very much for the inspiration. Thank you very much for making the cause endure, for keeping the hope alive, and for working to ensure that the dream will never die. Best of luck to you in all your efforts, and with the judge who you are going to face. Our prayers are with you, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much. It has been an absolute privilege to be here today, and I would just want to say one thing, and that's that every person's voice, it sounds cliche to say that it matters, but your perspective is part of a broader whole. We do not have change unless every person is willing to speak, and is willing to speak knowing that what they say may not be the quote right thing or may not be heard, but that it will echo and inspire others.
And one last thing, if you ever want to do anything about the rights of children, our society is virgin territory for that research. If you need any help in that, if I can contribute in any way, please feel free. Thank you very much indeed. God bless you. Take care.
God bless you. Thank you.